Traction control is commonplace in some forms of motorsports, however in NASCAR, it is highly illegal. In a sport where teams are fighting for hundredths of a second, any form of cheating that is caught is usually slammed with a major penalty. So when rumors of traction control arose in the early 2000s, it was a huge deal, probably even bigger than most thought. Wins, championships, and legacies could be questioned, and the reputation of NASCAR's biggest stars could be tarnished. If teams were caught with traction control, it would put the legitimacy of the entire sport in question. Huge names in the sport were making major accusations towards the sport's biggest stars. In no surprise, NASCAR denied these rumors, even claiming it was impossible to make it through pre- or post-race inspection with any traction control aids. In this video, we're going to go back and look at the history of NASCAR's traction control controversy. But right before we get into the video, make sure you leave a like if you enjoy, and subscribe if you haven't already. It's the best way to support my channel, and all of that is very appreciated. Anyway, let's get right into it. So, what's the big deal? NASCAR engineers have been bending the rules and been full of innovative ideas for decades, and it is typically praised by fans. But why do fans scoff at the idea of traction control? Well, it's because it's more of an aid for the driver that takes out the skill of driving heavy stock cars. Let's take Darlington for example. To go fast, drivers have to feather the throttle so the tires don't spin. They drive right on the limit. They keep the throttle open just enough to maintain high speeds and avoid breaking loose. Traction control essentially performs this function for the driver. Let's say a driver is using a traction control device and is going through the corner. A traction control system detects the wheel spin, and when this happens, the engine retards automatically, even if the driver is mashing the gas. Not only would a traction control device allow a driver to drive faster, their tires would wear slower. So now let's take a look from the beginning. The Gettysburg Time released an article in 1995 entitled "Winston Cup Spies Aren't Unnoticed," covering a major controversy: Winston Cup spies. It was an interesting problem at the time. Somebody from a team would dress up like a fan, ask for some autographs, then snap some pictures of competitors' cars. Stan Creekmore, who hosted the Racing Insider radio talk show in Virginia Beach, heard about spies and grew curious about the whole ordeal. Stan started following a spy following the first Union 400 at North Wilkesboro and saw him take some pictures of an ignition box while a NASCAR official was inspecting it. After this, Stan stated that NASCAR has suspected for some time that teams may be hiding illegal computer chips in ignition boxes that could be used for telemetry or traction control. Jeff Gordon was asked about illegal traction control devices just a couple of months later, but laughed it off. On July 9, 1995, Bob Zeller wrote an article stating that NASCAR was convinced that teams were using the sway bar to hide traction control devices, but couldn't find anything. Further, Bob stated that many teams in the truck garage were convinced that NASCAR had secretly confiscated traction control devices from several truck teams. Given both of these statements, after one of Richard Childress's trucks failed inspection at Bristol, red flags were raised, especially because the part that was illegal was the sway bar. However, Steve Peterson confirmed that there was no evidence of a traction control device in the series, clearing Richard Childress in the process. But that all changed the following year in 1996. In 1996, NASCAR busted driver Brian Reffner in pre-race inspection at IRP for using an illegal traction control device. As a result, his owner and crew chief was fined $5,000 and suspended for 5 NASCAR events. Now, what's even more eye-opening is that this was an owner who had only been in the sport for 2 years, and this was only the second year of Truck Series competition in general. There's no way this mid-pack Truck Series team was the first to crack the code to a traction control device. There were much more experienced teams and people in higher divisions of NASCAR. They probably bought the device or created one similar to somebody else, but just did a bad job at hiding it. There was no way this was the only device in the entire garage, especially given the rumors the year prior. As much as you would think this opened the floodgates, it went relatively under the radar. Over the next few years, rumors continued, but they were nothing more than rumors. Speculation grew around Bobby Hamilton's win at Martinsville in 1998. People were saying the car was too good to be true. According to one source, self-styled experts claimed nobody could handle the outside lane of that flat half-mile track like Bobby without help. Then, a few years later, a bombshell dropped in February of 2001. Insider Ken Barlow confessed something big. Just for context, Ken had owned cars that were entered in Busch Grand National races before, and according to him and two anonymous mechanics, he built traction control systems that were illegally used by Winston Cup teams. He admitted this because he claimed he had nothing to lose. NASCAR officials had already caught him using traction control devices at a local short track race. Later in that same year, David Poole wrote, "There's an epidemic of electronic traction control devices all over the Cup garage. Why can't guys do a decent burnout after winning a race?" Then the next year, in June of 2002, the Winston-Salem Journal reported that engine builders and car owners were becoming increasingly concerned about the growing use of illegal traction control devices on Winston Cup cars and NASCAR's inability to protect it. Before the first Martinsville race, NASCAR showed teams devices they had found through distributors. So these devices would be plugged into the ignition box in the car, where the driver could easily remove the device before inspection and plug it in before the race. NASCAR started to seal ignition wiring to prevent drivers from unplugging anything. However, crewmen of Cup teams reported they were secretly offered new devices that were undetectable and unlike anything NASCAR was aware of. An anonymous engine builder stated that to police it, NASCAR just had to listen. Even the sound the engines made was very distinct. Around the same time in 2002, Richard Childress stated that he was convinced that his team had been beaten by teams running traction control. At the time of this statement, both of his drivers were outside of the top 20 in points. So not only did you have rumors stemming from random people, you had a high-profile owner in Richard Childress stating that he believed other teams were cheating with traction control devices. Shortly after this, NASCAR addressed the issue to the press. Before the 2002 Pepsi 400 at Daytona, President Mike Helton stated that they wanted to clear the air. The rule in NASCAR is no traction control. Other top managers, Gary Nelson, Steve Peterson, and John Darby, were also present. They remained persistent that they were doing everything they could to find these illegal devices, if they were out there. More than anything, this press conference was a major threat to teams. Darby stated that the penalty would be severe, and that the rulebook would allow them to go beyond monetary policies. Word in the garage was that it would be a $100,000 fine and a 10-week suspension if any traction control device was found. So up to this point in the video, we have talked a lot about rumors. But now let's get into some specific instances people point towards claiming that traction control is used. Some people claim that Joe Nemechek had something at Rockingham in 2001, Kurt Busch at Bristol in 2002, and maybe Jimmy Johnson at California in April of 2002. The most popular example is Jeff Gordon after his 2003 Atlanta win when he cannot burn out. But by 2004, NASCAR required all ignition boxes to be mounted on the dashboard with the wiring harness exposed, which would prevent drivers from plugging in devices. However, an article titled Soft on Crime alleged that the big boys version of traction control is built into the car from the ground up. Wiring is put in the frame rails before the car is built, and the wires are painted over for further concealment. The same article claimed that there was a traction control device found on track after a Cup Series race at Bristol, which I'm assuming is the Kurt Busch one in 2002 that they're referencing, and then they also claim that NASCAR did little to no investigation to find out who it came from. However, this is the only source I have found saying anything remotely close to this, so take it with a grain of salt. So some people have speculated that NASCAR found these devices but tried to hide them. Why would NASCAR do this? Well, if NASCAR found a traction control device in one car, it would legitimize all the other rumors in the fans' eyes. Some people close to the sport say they believe that at one point, nearly half of the field was using some sort of illegal traction control device. So if NASCAR came public with a device found in a Cup car, it would tarnish the reputation of the sport and nullify all of these massive stars. I mean, just take this example that we just looked at for example. Gordon's trying to do a burnout, but it just looks, well, off. Imagine if he was caught after this race with a traction control device. The biggest star in NASCAR caught with a driving aid. His legacy would have been destroyed, and it would have ruined the integrity of the entire sport. But NASCAR did bust one driver in the Truck Series in 1996. So some people would argue that if they did find these devices, they would have busted them. Which is a good point, but NASCAR at this time had a reputation of not really enforcing penalties, especially when it came to the stars. They would simply just make an example out of the little guy. In a recent Actions Detrimental podcast, Denny Hamlin stated that in years past, even in years just before the next gen car, NASCAR would be like, hey, you better not do that again or you'll be in trouble. So this sort of supports a theory that NASCAR knew about the devices and just tried to settle it off the record. But after 2004, the rumors started to die down completely. And that's it. That's the story of traction control devices in NASCAR. But the mystery is this. Did traction control devices exist in the Cup Series? And if so, for how long? And how widespread was it? We might never know, unless somebody comes out in the future about it. It's evident these devices were used in the Truck Series, so it is not unlikely that it spread to the Cup Series. But let me know what you think down in the comments down below. That's it for this video. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, make sure you leave a like. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you do so you never miss a video. Anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.